There we go. Go ahead, Nick.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Post. I'm a designer in the Manage Workspace stage and also the Manage Optimize stage. And today I want to talk a little bit about the information architecture of GitLab, because this has become sort of the focus of my attention most recently with joining the Workspace group. So first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about background of why information architecture is important. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the current architecture that we have in GitLab, and then what the Manage Workspace team is going to do. I don't think we have time for the conceptual model stuff at the end, so I'll record a separate video there so I can share that and people can watch at their own leisure. So design at GitLab is unique, and this is what attracted me to GitLab. There are some big challenges for design based on our organizational setup, and these are sort of like the very large single application that we have, the decentralized way that we have designers split among cross-functional teams, as well as having open source contributions, and then our iterative culture as well. All of these make design challenging, but also interesting and potentially a superpower here at GitLab. So we've seen some challenges with our system usability score recently. It's been declining for the past few quarters. And some of the common themes that come up in user feedback are around complexity in the UI, difficulty with navigation and discoverability, and also onboarding. And when I look at these different problems, I sort of reflect and I think, you know, a lot of these could start to be addressed with some information architecture type thinking. In case people don't know what information architecture is, it's about helping people to understand their surroundings and find what they're looking for, both digitally and physically as well. So when I think about the problem statement that we have here, specifically for my group of Managed Workspace, I think, how might we use information architecture to improve the user experience and positively impact our system usability score? Hoping to fix things like this UI complexity, this navigation, this user onboarding, whilst maintaining the unique GitLab way of designing. So maintaining the single application, maintaining the decentralized way that we do design, and also maintaining the iteration that we hold so dear within our values. So when I think about this problem statement and I first started in the Workspace group, I didn't really know where to start. We've got such a big application. It's quite difficult to sort of figure out where we break this down and start working. So it's a bit of a challenge. But first thing I wanted to do was actually check out our current information architecture and understand it myself. And I really like this quote from Chesterton about, before going and breaking anything, it's useful to sort of understand why it was put up in the first place. So before I actually go and do anything to our information architecture, I want to understand the rationale as to why things were put up in the first place the way they are. And this I will try and communicate to you in the next 5 minutes and see if anyone is the wiser for it. So projects are the sort of primary container that we have, and projects host primarily a repository. They can also be used to plan work and collaborate on code and continuously ship things with CI/CD. So it's basically this combination of a repository plus the workflows associated with that repository. Groups came along a little bit later, and what groups do is they manage related projects together, and they also manage the broader workflows that span across these different projects. So for example, we have project screens and we have group screens, and there's some similarities here and there's also some differences. But imagine sort of coming to these two interfaces as a user, brand new to GitLab, and thinking, why does GitLab keep on swapping? And this is something that I definitely got confused with to start out with. So projects and groups, they have both shared and distinct features. And even when there is shared functionality, sometimes there's actually differences between what's available with regards to the information and functionality that's actually available. So projects, for example, uniquely have repositories. Groups, for example, uniquely have epics. And there's some shared things like labels and value streams and stuff like that. So for example, in group value stream analytics, we have the same feature shared between project VSA and group VSA. However, because of things needed to be built twice for the project level and the group level, and the fact that there are unique performance constraints around feasibility, this means that the way that this feature appears at these different levels actually is sometimes quite divergent. Another potentially confusing factor. So for larger organizations, one group is often not enough. Sometimes you need to have more nuanced organizational structures, and we can use nested subgroups for this. And you can have a group which contains projects. You could have a group which contains a subgroup which contains a project, or you can have different variations. But ultimately, this forms a sort of file tree type structure, which we use today. And there's some nuances here, but what's interesting is, you have separate project list and a separate group list of things that you can choose from, even though they actually technically exist within the same file tree. Now, groups, alongside having their own features, they also cascade content settings and access down to child subgroups and projects. So you can manage lots of things at once. But this sometimes manifests in inconsistent ways. An example of this would be milestones. So milestones can appear in the issue sidebar of a child project, but they don't actually appear in that project's milestone list. So the parent has these milestones, they show up in the issues of that project, but they don't show up in the milestone list of the project. So the way that this manifests is sometimes a little bit confusing with regards to what information is shown to the users. Alongside cascading information down, groups also aggregate content up. So this is useful because you can sort of aggregate across different projects and use that aggregation to understand things like analytics of how different projects are working side by side, and so on and so forth. So an example of this is issues don't actually exist at the group level. Instead, the group issue list contains issues that come from different projects below it. And we also have, alongside a project and group, we have something called an instance. And instance is actually only relevant to our self-managed customers. And within the instance level, it has its own unique features such as admin settings and hardware settings. But the instance is the top level container that exists within GitLab. And as I said before, the instance is only really applicable to our self-managed customers, because our software as a service customers basically sit on the GitLab.com instance. And this means that they technically are sort of using this top level group in order to manage everything that's going on. So there's a difference in the types of features that self-managed and SaaS customers have access to. And this is a big problem. So for example, SaaS customers are missing out on all the stuff that sits within the admin panel within GitLab. And that's a lot of useful stuff that could definitely be applicable. So to summarize, we have projects, we have groups, we have subgroups, we have the instance, and containers tend to house their own features. They tend to structure different teams and workflows. They tend to cascade content down to the children, and they tend to aggregate content up from their children. And there are a number of challenges associated with the current configuration of containers that we have currently, but I've rephrased it as principles in terms of what we need to do is we need to have greater efficiency with our containers in terms of removing the friction between them and potential for duplicate work, as I highlighted in value stream analytics before. We need to improve the consistency between these containers, specifically between self-managed and SaaS customers, but also between the features that are available between project, group, and instance. We need to enable and control information flow across different containers. And we also need to enable greater performance across these containers as well. So we can have more sophisticated queries and features that involve those queries. So that is that for our different, our current IA setup. And I thought I'd update the challenge statement here and include these IA principles that we're trying to solve for as well, in order to sort of include that within the broader problem. So now it comes to managed workspace. We've sort of understood the challenges that have come from our current IA, and we need to sort of understand a little bit more about what the managed workspace team is actually doing to try and address these. So the workspace group came about a couple of months ago, and it's responsible for rationalizing the data model for containers of resources within GitLab. Very technically focused definition there, but it's, I think, super accurate. And I think if you want a more designer focused term, I'd say this is probably very representative of what the workspace team is trying to do as well. My screen's frozen. There we go, back to it. Okay, so the managed workspace is currently focused on 3 key initiatives. Just checking the time, 15. Yeah, these initiatives are namespaces, workspace, and IA tools. First initiative, namespace, is about basically merging projects and groups together in order to get this consistency. And we're doing this using the technical term of namespace. Second is about giving parity between our SaaS and self-managed customers by creating this thing called Workspace. And then finally, it's providing designers tools in order to think about our information, our architecture, so you guys can do this yourselves. So I and the Workspace team aren't going to be able to do all these different namespace and workspace initiatives by ourselves. We're going to actually need everyone in the product team to help with us, or design team and so on. So yeah, it's about providing similar tools in order to help everyone think about these problems. So namespaces, workspace, IA tools, and here's 3 actions you can take right now: is join the Workspaces Ask Me Anything, which is happening next week. Start to plan for upcoming changes with regards to namespaces and workspaces. And this is a great example of how Camellia did it. And then read on further into this last chapter as well. Thank you very much for listening. I know I rushed through it, but this is designed to be able to be consumed and read at your own leisure. And I'll also record a video about the conceptual model stuff at a later date as well. Thank you very much.
Great job, Nick. And thank you so much and for being as close to on time as possible. You're actually right on time. Any questions or should we move on to the next one real quick? I don't see any questions in the agenda. They can, of course, start to fill out as we move on for time's sake if we need to, which I think is what we're going to do.